Welcome back to Grifter or Gifted, the show where we try to figure out, are they changing the world or just lining their pockets? And today we're diving into the case of Alex Murdaugh.
What's interesting about this is the amount of material you've actually given me. We've got court documents, investigative reports, we've got comments from jurors, we've even got comments from the new owner of his hunting estate.
Yeah.
So it really does paint a picture of a man who, seemingly had it all, but somehow ended up a convicted murderer.
Right. And you mentioned the hunting estate. We're talking about the Murdaugh dynasty.
Yeah.
I mean, for like a century, their name was basically the law in South Carolina's Lowcountry.
Yeah.
3 generations, they held the solicitor's office, which is basically like the top prosecutor in that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like legal royalty in that area. And they had incredible influence over the justice system. Not only that, but the family law firm, PMPED, they were a powerhouse. They won massive settlements, especially against big corporations like railroads.
So we've got this powerful family, this legacy built on a law. There's this aura of success and influence. But like any good story, there's got to be another side to this, right? Cracks in the facade.
Oh, absolutely. And they started showing up way before the murders.
Okay.
There were always whispers about the family's influence, how they were using their power to their advantage, maybe bending the rules a little bit.
So the name carried a lot of weight, but there was definitely this shadow lurking behind it. What were some of the things that chipped away at that perfect image?
Well, one that stands out is the unsolved death of Stephen Smith back in 2015.
Right.
A young man found dead near the Murdaugh property. Very suspicious circumstances. There was never any real resolution to that case, and that just fueled speculation about the family.
Right. And then just a few years later, you had the boat crash with his son, Paul. Tragically, a young woman, Mallory Beach, was killed. And there were all these accusations of a cover-up. People were saying that the Murdaugh family was using their influence to protect Paul.
Yeah, and that boat crash, it became a symbol of everything that people suspected about the Murdaughs. This sense of entitlement, the belief that they were above the law and they would use their power to just get away with anything.
So you've got this simmering pot of suspicion. And then in 2021, everything explodes when his wife, Maggie, and son, Paul, are found murdered.
At Moselle, which was their hunting estate, this huge property, a place that, should have been a sanctuary for the family, this symbol of their legacy. But it became the scene of this horrific crime that just shattered that carefully built image of this family.
It's like something out of, a Greek tragedy, this powerful family brought down by these events.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Even though Alex is named as a suspect, this story just keeps going with all these twists and turns that are like a Hollywood thriller.
It really does. And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It's a story that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Was Alex a victim of circumstance, or did he orchestrate his own downfall? And to find that out, I think we need to really go in, examine the evidence, and try to figure out what his motivations really were.
Right. And that's what we do here, right?
Yes.
We go past the headlines, the sensationalism.
Yeah.
We want to try to understand the man behind all this. So let's start by trying to figure out his life before all this happened. Was he genuinely this brilliant legal mind? Or was there always this hint of the grifter, lurking underneath?
It's a good question. It really is, because on the surface, he just had it all. Successful law practice, charming personality, well-respected in the community. But when you start digging a little deeper, you start seeing this pattern of behavior that's a little more complicated.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. What were some of the early signs that maybe things weren't as picture perfect as they seemed?
Well, even before the murders, there were these whispers about financial irregularities at his firm. People questioned his lavish lifestyle, saying it didn't really match up with his income.
So maybe a little bit of a spendthrift, living beyond his means. But that doesn't necessarily make him a grifter, does it? I mean, lots of people try to keep up appearances.
True, but we're trying to understand the whole picture here, right? And as investigators started looking into things after the murders, they uncovered this long history of financial misdeeds that went way beyond just spending too much.
This is where it gets really interesting. We're talking about allegations of stealing millions of dollars from his own clients.
Yeah.
People who trusted him, people he was supposed to be protecting.
Exactly. And we're not talking about a couple of isolated incidents here. The indictments allege that he stole almost $8.8 million from over a dozen people.
Wow.
And some of these people were particularly vulnerable. You had an immigrant, a deaf quadriplegic, even the family of his longtime housekeeper who died in a fall at his home.
It's just hard to reconcile that image of a charming, successful lawyer with someone who would prey on people like that.
Yeah.
Was it just pure greed? Or was there something else going on?
Well, that's a tough question. Psychologists and criminologists have debated this a lot. Some think his actions were driven by this need to keep up his lifestyle, to hide his debts, and maintain this image of success.
And we can't forget about his opioid addiction, which we touched on earlier. Could that have been a factor?
Oh, absolutely. Addiction can just lead to financial ruin. People get so consumed with getting drugs that they'll do anything to fund their habit. It's definitely possible that addiction fueled his desperation and led him to do things that were increasingly risky and unethical.
So we've got this mix of potential factors. Greed, addiction, maybe even a sense of entitlement that came with his family name and all that power. Do you think any one of these outweighs the others?
It's impossible to say for sure. Human behavior is rarely motivated by just one thing. It's usually this complex mix of internal and external forces. But what's clear is that his actions led him down a path of deceit and destruction.
And the murders of his wife and son, that becomes this pivotal point, right? It's like the moment when his carefully constructed world just falls apart.
Yeah, the prosecution argued that the murders were a desperate attempt to shift attention away from his financial crimes. A tragic distraction to buy him time to sort things out before his secrets were exposed.
That's a chilling thought. To think someone could commit such a horrific act to protect their reputation and their money. Did the defense offer any other explanation?
His lawyers were adamant that he would never kill his own family. They said his financial problems, while serious, wouldn't have driven him to murder. They argued the prosecution's case was built on speculation and character assassination, not real evidence.
But the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. What were some of the key pieces of evidence that led to that guilty verdict?
Well, one of the most damning things was a Snapchat video that Paul took right before the murders. It put Alex right there at the crime scene, which completely contradicted his alibi. It showed he lied about where he was that night.
That must have been a huge blow to the defense. Did Alex try to explain why he lied about being at the scene?
He claimed that he was paranoid because of his drug use and that he panicked when he found the bodies, afraid he'd be blamed, but the jury didn't believe him.
So you've got the video, the inconsistencies in his story, his history of financial deception. Sounds like a pretty strong case against him. But even with a conviction, this story doesn't end there, right?
No, not at all. Since the trial, there have been appeals, allegations of jury tampering, even new evidence that could potentially change the verdict.
Well, hold on. Let's break those down one by one.
Yeah.
You mentioned jury tampering. What exactly is being alleged?
Well, Alex's lawyers say that the court clerk, Rebecca Hill, had improper conversations with the jurors during the trial and might have swayed their decision. They claim she pushed them to reach a quick verdict and even shared her opinions about Alex's guilt.
That's a serious accusation. Did Hill respond to those allegations?
She denied any wrongdoing. She said she never talked about the case with the jurors or tried to influence them. However, 2 jurors have come forward and said they remember Hill making comments about the trial. They insist, though, that what she said didn't affect their decision.
So there's some disagreement about what was said and whether it mattered. But even if she did make inappropriate remarks, is that enough to get a new trial?
That's what Alex's lawyers are trying to prove. They filed an appeal arguing that Hill's actions amounted to jury tampering and denied Alex a fair trial. Now it's up to the South Carolina Supreme Court to decide whether to grant a new trial based on those claims.
And then there's this new evidence found at Moselle. This is where things get really interesting. We're talking about potential evidence that could clear his name.
It's possible. The new owner of Moselle, his former hunting estate, says he found things on the property that weren't presented at the trial. He thinks these items cast doubt on Alex's guilt and suggests there might have been someone else involved.
This is huge. What kind of items are we talking about? And how come they weren't found during the initial investigation?
Well, the details are still a little fuzzy. We don't know exactly what was found or how it connects to the murders, but if this new evidence is considered credible and important enough, it could lead to the case being reopened.
So we've got allegations of jury tampering, potential new evidence, and a convicted killer who says he's innocent. It's like a real-life legal thriller. But what does all this mean for our original question, grifter or gifted?
It's even more complicated now, isn't it? We've got this guy who built a successful career on intelligence and charm, but he also deceived and manipulated people on a huge scale. The murders, the financial crimes, the unanswered questions, it all suggests a man driven by ambition and control, but maybe also consumed by his own inner demons.
It's almost Shakespearean, the rise and fall of a powerful figure, the blurring of lines between brilliance and deceit.
Exactly. And as this story continues to unfold, we're left wrestling with the complexities of human nature and the challenge of finding the truth.
You know, it's crazy to think that even with a conviction, with 2 life sentences, this might not be over for Alex Murdaugh. This case has really captured people's attention, and I think it's because it goes deeper than just a true crime story. It makes you think about power, about success, about how well we really know people.
I think you're right. The Murdaugh case really shows us that appearances can be deceiving. We're all drawn to stories of ambition, of achievement, but we also kind of can't resist that dark side of human nature, that potential for things to go wrong.
And in this case, the line between grifter and gifted is just so blurred. We've seen signs of both, brilliance and manipulation, generosity and cruelty. It's hard to wrap your head around it all.
It really is. And that's part of what keeps us coming back to this story. We keep reevaluating what we thought we knew, trying to understand why he did the things he did. Was he really trying to help his clients, serve his community? Or was it all just a show to cover up his own greed? Maybe it's a bit of both.
Yeah, it's like we're looking at 2 sides of the same person. On one hand, he's a successful lawyer, a family man, a pillar of the community. But then you have the accusations of fraud, the possible cover-ups, and then the murders. It's such a stark contrast.
And it makes you think about the nature of power, how it can corrupt people. Did his family's legacy, all those years of influence, give him this sense of entitlement, like he was above the law? Did that contribute to his downfall?
That's something that resonates with a lot of people, especially these days. We see examples of power being abused all the time. The Murdaugh case is a reminder that even those who seem to have it all can be brought down by their own weaknesses.
It's a story that's still unfolding. We have the appeals, the new evidence at Moselle, the possibility that everything we think we know could change.
It's true. We're in this weird place. He's been convicted, but there's still so much uncertainty, and I think that's what keeps people hooked. We're all waiting to see what happens next.
And while we wait, we're left with these big questions. How do we tell the good guys from the bad guys? How do we spot deception? And how do we hold those in power accountable?
These are questions that go way beyond Alex Murdaugh. They're questions we should be asking ourselves all the time.
Definitely. In our relationships, at work, everywhere, we need to be skeptical, think critically, and question what we see and hear.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Alex Murdaugh case, we're left with more questions than answers. But maybe that's the whole point. This case reminds us that the truth is often complicated and that finding justice takes time. It's up to each of us to look at the evidence, challenge our own biases, and decide what we believe.
And to remember that behind all the headlines, all the legal drama, there are real people whose lives have been shattered by this. The victims, their families, the community, they all deserve our empathy and our continued support in the search for justice.
Well said. And to our listeners, as you follow this case, keep digging, keep asking questions, and don't just accept everything you hear at face value. Until next time, stay curious.